I had to finish the film. And when you're a director of a film, nobody else usually cares about it as much as you do. I had to realize that and really take full responsibility for it.
What happens when a piece of media, a photograph, home movie, or audio tape, is the only connection to a lost family member? For journalist Rachel Seed, whose mother died when she was just 18 months old, the discovery of a trove of archival material about her mother, Sheila Turner-Seed, becomes the starting point for a multi-year journey to find out more about a person she barely remembered. Rachel's mother was a trailblazing photojournalist who not only produced an amazing body of her own work, but also interviewed photographer icons like Henri Cartier-Bresson, Cecil Beaton, and Gordon Parks, among others. The film is a deeply personal journey, and we follow Rachel as she discovers more about her mother. We witness a developing mother-daughter conversation and gain insight into such universal themes as memory, loss, and legacy. The winner of the Truer Than Fiction Award at the 2025 Independent Spirit Awards, A Photographic Memory, is a genre-bending work that will haunt and delight in equal measure. To hear more about her 10-year journey to make this remarkable film, join us for our conversation with filmmaker Rachel Seed on Inside the Art House, starting now.
Hi, my name is Greg Lemley.
And I'm Raphael Spart.
And welcome to another episode of Inside the Art House. Today, we're joined with filmmaker Rachel Seed, who's here to talk about her film, A Photographic Memory.
Welcome. Yeah.
I'm reticent to call it a documentary because it seems like, it's playing with form. And to the extent that documentaries are about educating and a journey of discovery, I guess my first question is, who are we trying to learn more about in this film?
Yeah, it does play with form a bit. I had to really embrace the film is really about my journey to get to know my mother, who I never knew, through her archive. And it's really like through my experience and my sort of traveling around, meeting people, finding things, interpreting them emotionally within myself, and then in the film that sort of structures the whole film.
But there's a strong element of self-discovery, I guess, and maybe that was not the goal at the beginning of the journey. But at what point did you realize that that's partly what the film was about, at least?
Yeah, I mean, before I made the film, I was a photographer and writer mainly for work, and I was very used to being on the other side of the camera, on the other side of the pen, writing about other people's stories. And so that was initially what I thought this would be. But I hadn't really put it together that actually I was the one trying to find these things out. And therefore, people had to see me and hear from me in the film. So that was kind of a slow and challenging awakening for me to realize the extent to which my story needed to be in the film in order for it to really work. Because we had so many test screenings and people would always say, well, how does Rachel feel about this? What does Rachel think about this?
So there was a cut that was just sort of focused primarily on your mother and her story.
It was always from sort of my lens. But the extent to which I included narration that was emotionally revealing, that had to be developed over many years. And I had to be pushed in that direction by editors, by the Sundance Labs, whoever I was trying to improve the film, I was told, there needs to be more of this. We're not getting enough of you. You're unknowable.
Right.
And so
you're a little too, sort of in the shadows and let's bring you forward.
Yeah, right. And so that wasn't a natural, perspective for me to put into the film, and that was a real learning process.
Because as you do, we are able to kind of experience both your loss and the process of discovery. As Greg is suggesting with this question, we discover her, but we also really get a sense of you. And so it becomes kind of this kind of a...
Even more than that, I think you get a sense of you, maybe.
Yeah.
I get a sense of who I am in relation to my mother and that relationship, I think.
Her absence, yeah.
Her absence, exactly. How did that form me? How am I processing that absence and that loss? How do I move forward with my life and not have it be the only thing that I have to be obsessed with? So there are all these questions that I sort of work out. And that's a very specific part of myself that's in the film. There's a lot of things that obviously don't end up in the film, but when you see it, you think, oh, that's just Rachel. But I had to think of myself as a character in order to only put that part in.
I get that. Yeah. I get that. So to figure out the markers to kind of figure out how to kind of go through the story.
It's 85 minutes, so.
No, and I got to be clear. I think it's terrific. I'm not trying to be provocative or anything like that. But no, but but I think adds a real richness to the film. I'm curious, were there any films, other documentaries that you saw where you said, oh, okay, I see what they want me to do here or what they're encouraging me to do. And yeah, it works in that film and for that person's life. So yeah, let me experiment with this.
I've obsessively watched autobiographical documentaries and even some narrative films that sort of have that vibe for years so that I could see what I like, what I don't like. I'm extremely critical of them because I wanted to not do certain things. For example, I think some people don't go far enough because as a director, I have control over how I am in the film. So some directors want to stay safe and they don't put in the extra vulnerable stuff. And you can kind of tell that it's just this sort of avatar that's not really authentic.
Right.
And
right.
so,
like a placeholder or something. Yeah.
Yeah. So authenticity was one of the most important things to me. You know, it is a documentary, but there aren't that many facts in it because it's from my perspective. So I realized it just has to be authentic to my experience. It doesn't, beyond like the year my mother died and, you know, some of these factual events. As a documentary, it's not journalism. And so that allowed me to really play with the form a lot and have real freedom because who could argue with what I experienced and then I'm kind of making into a film. I kind of realized that at one point.
Well, doesn't it go to the reason why you told the film, which is the fact is that your mother passed when you were 18 months old. The fact is that you grew up with no mother. Right. And the fact is that she was an extraordinary person and all these people knew her and she was sort of renowned for her work and what she did. And there was a lot of kind of background information, but nothing sort of tangible for you. So, I mean, and this is you spent 10 years on this. And I wonder, I mean, the spark of it has to have been something that a knot you're trying to untie, right?
Yeah, it was really just like a void of knowledge. I couldn't picture her in my head. I couldn't hear her voice. I didn't know what she looked like when she was walking down the street. I just didn't have these basic ideas of who she was when she was living. And so I think it was through all these bits of archival material that I pieced those things together. And that's really what happens in the film. Can
I ask you this? I mean, by not having a sense of your mother, did that leave you with a sense of like being limbless or like essentially like you didn't have a sense of yourself? What did that do to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I had a sense of myself in one regard. It was really this longing that I felt within myself that was sort of gnawing away at me, which I didn't even realize as I was growing up. It wasn't until I was a bit older and sort of an adult looking back. As you know, when you're a kid, you don't really think about what's happening in your childhood. Right. It's like you turn 18 and then all of a sudden you're like, wait, my life wasn't like everybody else's. Why? You know? And that's kind of what happened to me. And then as I became a photographer and I realized that there was this trove of her material, it became this dual thing of like, what of her is in these materials? And also I'm a photographer, so I'm interested in hearing them just from a photo history perspective.
No, we say these things that you in the movie discover, these incredible treasure trove at the Center for Photography in New York, interviews that she did with arguably some of the greatest photographers of all times. So that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, those interviews were sort of the point where I was able to get into the story. And then I just kept discovering more and more amazing stuff.
Let's take a look at maybe something that was early on, because it's not just materials, there are people that you can discover or try to. So let's take a look at a clip from A Photographic Memory.
Well, there's actually one more number here, so I'll try it.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Rachel Seed. I'm Sheila Turner-Seed's daughter.
Sheila, oh my God. It's Sheila Turner's daughter. How are you?
I'm good. I'm actually calling people from her address book. And I'm collecting stories, and I'm learning about who she was because she died when I was so young.
How old were you when she died?
I was 18 months old when she died.
Oh, that you didn't really know her. Your mother was a remarkable storyteller.
So how early in the process was that?
That was filmed probably around 2015 or 16. So that was 4 or 5 years after I started the film.
Oh, okay.
I didn't find the address book until 4 or 5 years after I started it. I didn't find 300,000 of all of her photographs until I think 7 or 8 years after.
300,000?
300,000. It was a plastic bag from the 1970s from London where they lived that had all of her negatives in them in my dad's garage.
Oh my God.
I mean, just casually lying in like a filing cabinet. That happened throughout the 10 years. And that's one of the reasons it took so long.
Because you were literally on a treasure hunt in a way.
Oh, yeah. It was like all of a sudden well, now I have 300,000 photos that correspond to her journal stories. So all of a sudden it became much more alive. It was like, oh, that's the person she's talking about on, March 15th, 1966, when she's traveling to Egypt or whatever it was.
Right.
Yeah.
When you,
It's a jigsaw puzzle.
yeah.
It was really incredible. Like when things would come together.
And there's missing pieces in some cases.
They're missing pieces. And then when things would come together, it felt so alive. I just felt like I was back in that moment reading, visualizing what she saw and experienced.
When you would open one of these things, or when you would get suddenly a connect with someone, or as you began to hear her voice, or see you as a toddler with her, is there a way to talk about what that must have been like for you to kind of open that box, I guess?
Yeah, I think every discovery had its own I was transformed in a different way each time I found something really significant. Like seeing myself with her, that was the first time I saw myself with a mother alive and, visualizing myself as a girl who had a mother, as I say in the film. And obviously that was super profound because I didn't know that moment existed. I mean, obviously it existed, but I couldn't visualize it. Reading her journals, all of a sudden I understood who she was to herself. And that didn't happen until probably 9 years into making the film, believe it or not. God. The whole time I had all these interviews of people telling me who she was. And most of the time it was, she's amazing, she's pioneer, she's this, she's that. But now I have her saying, I'm suicidally depressed because, I feel so lonely because she had no role models. She had, she was fighting against guys in the newsroom to get her stuff made. And her family was this traditional Jewish family. And they just, why didn't you just get married and have kids when you were 19 or 20? And she was a total outlier. So she didn't really have, a community of support initially. She found it in New York City eventually. But yeah, so just discovering each of these things they all changed me because I changed my perspective of her and who I was in relation to that. So it was kind of like slowly like morphing into like a full picture, I guess.
It's interesting that it took 10 years. It's so hard to explain how it took that long, clearly, for you to be able to kind of get to the place where you could actually sort of tell the story, I assume.
Yeah, I don't recommend making a film like this.
Yeah, I'm wondering, did you ever worry that you were never going to be able to finish the film? Because it's an endless process of discovery in some respects.
I had this very intense determination and knowledge that I had to finish the film or I really couldn't do anything else significantly creative with my life or even in my personal life. I couldn't do anything major. And so because of that, I kind of held myself to the fire because when you're a director of a film, nobody else usually cares about it as much as you do.
Right.
So I had to realize that and really take full responsibility for it. And it was just like I had to finish it. And it was extremely challenging to do.
Yeah. Well, look, and I don't want to give this, it's not incomplete, but it's like a painter. I mean, when do you reach the point when it's like, okay, I'm happy with this painting. It's complete.
Yeah. You have to.
And that's probably really hard for a photographer because at some level it's like, okay, I took or a writer, anything like that. You have to walk away at a certain point so that you have the space to do other things, And for me, this took up so much space in my life. It was essential that I finish it. My co-writer and editor, Christopher Stout, also my partner now, helped me finish it the last year and a half.
Did he sort of push you to do that, or did he kind of,
by default, poor guy happened to be around.
Carry you over the finish line.
Have really good writing and editing skills. And
that's good.
He was in the wrong place at the wrong time or the right place at the right time for me. It was really a collaboration for the last year and a half. It was, previous to that, I worked with some great editors, but I was never able to get what I saw in my head onto the screen in the way that Christopher and I were finally able to do. And even this, there's many things I would want to do differently even to this day. But I mean, I am happy with the film, but yeah.
Is that just sort of your mind that you're just constantly kind of trying to figure out a way to kind of keep adjusting
Keep improving?
It's not so much that. I had certain creative goals for the film. Like I love the sort of nonlinear, imaginative sort of like not magical realism type stuff. I feel like there could have been a lot more like of conversation with my mother that I have in the film. Because I think that's really unique and kind of magical that I can have this conversation with her through her archive. So
and you reading her journal also is hugely moving.
There's incredible stories in her journal. I mean, just hundreds of pages, and so there's comparison, just the part that fit with the story that's in the film. But there's just so much amazing stuff in there. So,
you know, for what it's worth, I mean, I watched it twice. I really loved your movie, and I mean, it's a documentary about your mother and about you and your mother. But there's a thing that happens in really wonderful movies where it becomes not just that. It becomes actually sort of, in a way, kind of evocative of a little bit of everything.
100%.
And my grief and or my relationship to my parents and or, you know, sort of an artist's life, or, you know, it just becomes, in a way, faceted and resonant in so many areas. And that's what it sort of, I mean, the trajectory is you're figuring something out, but it really is so much more than that. And again, that's what taking 10 years sometimes can do, I guess, because you really were able to kind of build and gather enough to do that.
Yeah, I think you nailed like one of my primary goals in making the film, and something I was always aware of, which is, you know, another pitfall of some autobiographical docs is they can be like family movies, or
Right.
they can really sometimes only be interesting or important to the family. And what is that little bit of difference that makes something universal? That was a question I was constantly thinking about as we were editing and as I was writing the film. And it was extremely important to me that anybody would watch the film and see their own mother, their own father, their own family, their own loss, their own love of photography or art, or balancing art and life together.
Right. And a woman's journey.
Yeah, and so it touches different audiences. One is a senior audience who was born around the same time as her, who understands they went to college to find their husband or wife or whatever it was as well.
Or degree in home ec, right?
Right, the degree in home ec, you know, so I love showing it to senior audiences who totally get that part of it. People who love photography. I just showed it in Poland a couple weeks ago at the Millennium Docs Against Gravity Festival, and I went there. And somebody posted on Instagram, I had to translate from Polish. They wrote down by hand in their journal all of the photographer interviews word by word that are in the film. And we're studying them.
Wow.
And the Polish audiences are incredible. So things like that happen with photography audiences. And then there's just like women and film and journalism, photography, and anybody with a mother. So there's different
Or
things.
anyone who has kids, right?
Or
yeah.
anyone with kids, or
Right.
young kids. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
This is not a dinner party where you have to struggle through somebody's. Let me show you my pictures of my vacation.
Yeah.
This is me in Egypt. And this is me in the
This
Grand
is you
Canyon.
learning. This is you watching. Look, watching you learn something about ourselves, I think, helps us learn something about ourselves. So that's really what makes the film universal. Ultimately, the title, "Photographic Memory," a little provocative, or challenging, or filled with different interpretations, I guess.
That was the title from the very beginning. I thought about changing it at various times. Like a front runner was "Life is once forever" or "Once forever," based on the Cartier-Bresson quote.
Yeah, I love that quote.
Okay, yeah.
I feel like that title kind of summed up different aspects of what the film is about
Because the phrase is used. Oh yeah, that person. They remember everything.
and it has zero to do with that. Well, I remember nothing, so maybe it's like the other side of
the
that.
irony of
The
that.
irony
Yeah.
of that is that you do not remember anything. The only way you can remember is through, well, not only, but certainly one way of remembering is through these photographs of your mom.
Yeah, and the idea of memory, that being a layer of the film, not realizing that I had a memory of her voice until I heard her voice. So there were so many learning experiences within the film about memory and what it is, because before I thought it has to be conscious. You know, memory is something you can consciously recall, but actually I found it could also be subconscious, and that was really eye-opening.
There is something about hearing someone's voice, isn't there? I mean, even Cartier-Bresson, who I don't think I've ever heard him speak. It was like, it was sort of like, oh my God, that's the guy, you know. And can you say, so that everyone can hear that which is, it opens your movie, but his quote, which is that you just referenced as a possible title. Can you just say that again?
Yeah, he says, you can't tell the person, oh, please smile again, please do that gesture again. Life is once, forever. So that's his whole philosophy, you know. It's about photography too. It's like you're capturing these split things. They'll never happen again in the exact same way.
And I hear the camera.
If you don't capture it, it's gone. But maybe.
Yeah, and I think it speaks not only to photography, but also just to the experience of living life and, you know, and memory. You're trying to capture these things, and then they're just gone. And we have to somehow, as humans, accept that fleetingness, that fleeting nature of life and our own mortality. So I think those are all kind of layers within that that I think of when I hear that quote.
100%.
And he was a Buddhist, Cartier-Bresson.
He was.
So that's another interesting layer to him and his philosophies.
Let's take a look at another clip. This one, I think, really shows off the sort of dreamlike quality of the film, or some elements of that.
Great. As far back as I can remember, there were cameras. So many cameras. This was my first camera. But we didn't just film milestones. We filmed everything.
Yeah.
So beautiful.
Yeah, dreamlike and poetic in that sense. Yeah, I mean, it really sort of takes you there.
I love that song, too. It's by Troy Harrian, composer. It just really captures that sort of whimsical, nostalgic, back in time, imagination kind of feeling.
What was the emotional experience of finally saying, I'm done?
It was the biggest relief of my life, honestly. The moment that we premiered at True False, and the moment we got in there and I made the decision to accept the invitation, I just felt like a 1,000,000-pound weight lifted off of me to know that it would finally be in the world. I didn't have to keep toiling away these minutiae of the cut, and could finally share all of this stuff that had been, I've been working on for so many years.
Yeah, and friends of yours who perhaps hadn't seen it had heard you talking about it for all these years?
Oh my gosh, friends, family. I did a Kickstarter, I think it was 2013. I had 505 supporters, and throughout the decade to follow, I would sporadically get emails. So when am I going to get my DVD? And I had to break it to some people that, technology had changed a little bit. We weren't doing DVDs right now, so here's a digital link, things like that. Or somebody gave me like $5 back then and, was really mad that it wasn't done yet. But I am very grateful for all of the amazing Kickstarter support.
I know those Kickstarter the supporters, they get very vocal. Yes, right.
Yeah, they do. It's funny. Yeah.
Where's my bag? Right, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And now the wisdom is like, don't offer physical perks because of that issue. You don't know when the film's going to be done. You don't know if that technology will even exist anymore.
Right. Wow. That's funny. Just in terms of just the process of you actually sort of being able to gather the funds to be able to kind of put this together. Because doing it over 10 years, talking about Kickstarter, obviously that's one thing, but how did you keep going also? Oh gosh,
I fundraised in almost every possible way you can imagine. Starting with grant applications. I probably wrote hundreds of pages of grant applications. I think in the end we got over a dozen, or not about a dozen. I eventually got investors on board. I had a letter campaign, physical letters sent out to people, and then philanthropists, and everything in between.
Just sort of ring a lot of bells, just make a lot of noise, and just let everyone know about it.
It's a ton of hard work, but it's also very strategic, as anybody who has to raise money will know, because you have to build relationships, and you have to show what you're doing and convince people that it's worthwhile. And that in and of itself is really a full-time job, just another hat amongst the many.
Well, without being too partisan, let's put a shout out for public funding of arts grants and the importance,
100%.
The important role that they play.
Yes, absolutely. And for beautiful art house theaters like this one, it's very critical.
Yeah. Can you talk about, essentially, did you face a choice of going virtual, as it were, or digital as opposed to actually having a theatrical run? What was that? Was there
going virtual and digital, like early on in the process, was never, ever a consideration for me. I would almost rather not put the film out than put it out only virtual. Well, that's not true. I would put it out if that was the only option, but it was extremely important to me to be in person in theaters and get to share it. That was my number one priority in finishing the film. So we've had like a pretty robust festival run because of that. And then the theatrical is also wonderful and exciting. I just don't think it gets better for a filmmaker and for audiences to be live in a theater, sharing a film and getting to hear, talk to the filmmaker and have the filmmaker get to talk to the audience. That's just as good as it gets, I think.
I 1,000% agree.
You guys are biased, but you agree.
You're just a teeny bit biased.
I mean, yes, obviously, I think it's a better way to see a movie. I think it's what you intended for the audience. I think I always think that giving yourself over to the storyteller is super important. And once you have that control in your hand of stop and start, you've already changed your relationship with the film.
That's true.
But that being said, I mean, people are going to be able to find it online, and that's fine.
Yes.
We do want people to see the
Eventually,
film, regardless of how and where they see it.
We'll get there, right?
Yeah, I prefer for that not to be the default or the thing that stops people from going to theaters. And I do think there is something to be said for windowing so that it's not just hyper available everywhere. Because I think even psychologically, people think if they can find it online, they don't have to bother necessarily going to the theater.
Right.
And so they might be, losing that experience of going to the theater because of that, and also losing the.
It's an investment of time to get out of your house and down to your local movie theater, but it's the return on that investment, I would argue, is far greater.
It's personally one of my top favorite things to do in the world. I absolutely love movie theaters. I love the smell of popcorn.
Yeah,
we should have had a bag for you. I got to do that for future guests.
Yeah, that's a good idea. No, there is something about sort of being in a crowd of people and sort of how they amplify the emotional quotient of a movie, and films are delivery of devices for feeling, obviously through every way in which they do visually, through the sound, the music, and the impact of it. But it is, it's absolutely amplified when you're in a crowd of other people also sharing at the same time.
Yeah. And if you are stopping and starting it at home, and I do that, we're all guilty of that. Because there's so many distractions and it's hard to hold people's attention these days. And there have been movies where I've sat in the theater and wished that I could stop.
Yes, right. There are those too, right?
Hopefully, we're not making
or make it
movies.
stop, right? Yes.
Yeah, exactly. But you don't have a choice if you're stuck here in the theater.
Yeah.
You got to sit through it.
Yeah, that's true.
As we're sitting here now talking, the film has already opened in New York City. That's correct?
It did open, but we're having an official theatrical run starting June 27th.
Oh, okay, great.
Even though we played sort of on the down low at a theater in New York, only to qualify last year for awards.
Yes.
So that was a separate thing. And then we're also opening in Chicago at the Cecil Film Center June 20th for a week, which is where I grew up and my mother is from. So
the screenings that we're having in LA, which are taking place on June 12th and then the following weekend, June 13, 14, 15, those are actually going to precede all of that.
They're preceding it, yeah. So it's kind of the first in the big city run.
All right.
That's great. That's great.
Will you be in Chicago for the screenings at the Cisco?
I absolutely will be. Yeah, and I'm roping in some photographers and curators to get on stage with me and talk about some of the aspects of the film.
Right. And then where are we opening in New York? Where's the film open?
So we're going to be at a few places. We're going to be at IFC for a night. We're going to be at the New Plaza Cinemas.
New Plaza's perfect for this, yeah.
And we're going to be at the Bronx Documentary Center.
Excellent.
Which is personally exciting to me because I love connecting with the photo community.
Yeah, I mean, if for photographers, this is straight up their must see. There's no question about it.
The interviews in the film have never been heard by anybody. My mother edited them into 15-minute final audiovisual programs. But
let's elaborate on what these interviews are, just so that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a little tricky to understand because technology has changed so much. At the time, she was making audiovisual programs in a box set of individual photographers that were shipped around to schools, museums, libraries. They were educational, but they had legs way beyond that. But she interviewed, for example, Cartier-Bresson for many hours. And so in her final program is only 15 minutes. What no one's ever heard is the other 3 hours and 45 minutes. They've never heard her actually interviewing him. It's just his voice in the final one. So there's just incredibly rich trove. And there's, I believe, 12 different photographers. I mean, and at that time in the 70s, people were not sitting down with photographers and interviewing them in this way.
Right.
It was actually visionary at that time, even though now photography films are popular. But Cartier-Bresson had never sat down with anyone, I don't think, for 8 hours, waxing about all of his philosophies beyond photography and life and everything.
Yeah.
So they're really unique, and I actually really would like to do a podcast with them.
Yeah. I mean, that's the next question, which is what's going to happen to those? I mean, I guess are they? I know they were donated to the Center for Photography.
Yeah, so they live in analog form in the archives of the International Center for Photography, where they have been since 1979.
Which is great.
They were preserved very well. Thank you, Cornell Kappa, for the insight of having them in a temperature-controlled environment.
Yes.
But I think it maybe requires a bit of pushing and collaboration to actually get them out into the world. And almost every audience, somebody asks how they can hear the rest of the interviews.
Sounds like another Kickstarter campaign. Getting going here. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Got to do another one of those.
Yeah.
But that's one of the many troves of material that I unearthed during this film. But for me, maybe the most exciting one, because I love photography.
I mean, you said you're a journalist and you're also a photographer. Is that sort of your work kind of lane?
Not anymore. When I started making this film, I was already sort of transitioning away from photography as a way to make a living, because frankly, the industry, it became harder and harder to make a living.
Right.
Just like as a musician, all the Spotify, Instagram, these things have sort of made it more difficult for artists. So I kind of leaned more into filmmaking. And since then, I produce a lot of other films. I've directed other short films. And that's and I also do freelance writing still. So those are more my avenues now. But, I love taking pictures still, and I love engaging with photography and learning about it. So that hasn't changed. It's just not my bread and butter these days.
Understood. Has the, paint dried enough for you to begin to actually sort of consider doing a next film?
I'm currently producing and or consulting on 6 other features, one of which is narrative and the rest are docs. And I'm also developing one that I'm co-directing with another director. So yeah, I'm I'm already doing that. I will say, just putting out the theatrical,
That's a job.
that is a big job. As a filmmaker, you tend to care about, that and the conversations around the film. So I'm still very much involved with planning those events. We've been sending a lot of emails about those, so
Yes. But you have a terrific distributor. I mean,
Yes, absolutely.
Zeitgeist Films is amazing.
Zeitgeist and Kino Lorber have embraced the project passionately and are helping us get it out there. So,
and we got to love Kino because, they still believe in physical media. And I would assume, hopefully there's going to be a DVD,
There's
a Blu-ray,
going to be a DVD.
which should have some great bonus features as well.
Thank you for nudging me. I'll have to dig some out of the archives.
Yeah, that's another huge project, by the way.
Oh, I know. It's like,
okay. It's another mountain
One
climb.
more thing for Rachel to do.
Just so you know.
Yeah, I need a team of people. And just to speak to the archive one more time, in addition to these interviews, these photographer interviews my mother did, she also wrote hundreds of articles and traveled around the world for years and photographed them. You see one of those in the film. It's a scene about Egypt,
Right.
Where she's the only woman standing on a roof in Cairo photographing the funeral of their president with these mobs of people like hanging from telephone wires and all these things. There's countless adventures like that she has had. Unfortunately, we couldn't put too many of them in the film, but I am also thinking about potentially a TV series where that's sort of a fictionalized version of her adventures as a female journalist in the 70s.
Wow.
That my partner Christopher Stout and I have been talking about. So yeah, just endless things to do with this archive.
Yeah, I'd say it's really. I mean, it's an extraordinary thing that you discovered. It's even that you knew that it was there, or that someone directed you there. I mean, it's really, for anyone who really cares, it's thrilling to imagine.
Oh yeah, and she was only 42 when she died, so she created so much in her short life. I think she was only just getting started. That's part of the sadness of her loss. But
how do you feel now, I guess, as relates to your mom? I mean, you started this sort of saying that you didn't really have a sense of who you were because you didn't know your mother. How are you now? What does it feel like that's different? What's changed?
I think, to my surprise, I feel complete with the process. I feel complete with what I know about her, the relationship I was able to build through all these things I found and through all these kind of conversations I had with her along the way. And I really did feel at the end of the process that I was a different person and I was able to move on from that search. I think, which is quite miraculous, that just archival materials, engaging with them, can lead to that kind of healing. And then in the film itself, I don't want to give away the last image, but, I was able to really kind of put myself in her shoes in various ways. I was able to imagine cinematically being with her. Seeing that was like, I guess, some advanced form of art therapy.
Yeah.
Because it really felt real. I mean, you see something on the screen and it's real to us, right? That's why movies are so powerful.
Yes. Yes.
And so to be able to create that, I was honestly breathless looking at and thinking how real that was and how healing it was. And it just made me think about the power of movies and the power of, voices and audio and photographs to really help us connect with people and stories. Kind of blows my mind, honestly.
It is. It is the best of a documentary like this, which is that it wasn't just for you, it's for all of us. I mean, we all kind of feel it, whether my parents didn't die as young as yours, but it is
We all eventually lose our parents.
Yeah, and it was deeply resonant. Yeah, really moved me very much.
Thank you.
If I can, I mean, separately, I'm curious about your thoughts on photography today. The ubiquity of photography, in some respects, has a lot. The fact that the pictures are so easy to take. Does it devalue it in some way, shape, or form? And I guess more importantly, with the coming of AI technology and something, does it take this thing that we used to think is capturing a moment of truth, and now who the hell knows?
I mean, I think it still takes years to become a master of any art form. So I still go back to that. One of the things I love the most to study was photo history, and I think everybody studying photography should have to study photo history and know where we come from as an art form. I was just in Barcelona a couple weeks ago, and I hadn't been there in 20 plus years, before pre-smartphone. And I went to one of the main attractions, Park Güell, which is Gaudi's park. And nobody was actually seemingly enjoying just being in the park. I mean, it seemed 100% to be about taking pictures of being
in
there,
the park.
like thousands of people taking thousands of photographs. And that seemed to be all they cared about. And there was something really sad to me about that. And I think that was like an extreme version of, are we actually present in moments now? Or, maybe slightly older generations still can be, but it seems to me that it's so much more about like, I got to show this to the people online, so I'm not actually there. And I think that's one of the things I think is sad about the sort of taking so many pictures as opposed to being present. But I think the camera was always, I've thought a lot about this, the camera was always potentially could get in the way of a relationship, or it could foster one. So I think that's one of the things the film explores is like, how do we use the camera? You might use it to get away from people. Like, I have an excuse. I can go photograph something else. Or you might say, I'd love to photograph you because you want to get to know that person. And so I think it's really interesting. And Gordon Parks said he had a book called A Choice of Weapons. And for him, the camera could be a weapon. And Cartier-Bresson, in his interview, not in the film, but he says it could be all these different things. It could be a warm kiss. It could be a shotgun. It could be this. It could be that. And I love that every photographer uses the camera differently. So I think there is still a wonderful value inherent to photography, but I do think it can very easily be cheapened or extremely mindlessly used in ways that stop us from really connecting with each other. I'm a little bit of a nihilist, I think, in this regard, but I think it's the sort of spiral towards some kind of cultural apocalypse or something. It's just the way that people feel that they have to always be like capturing what they're doing and sharing it.
Okay, I mean, we've been making images for tens of thousands of years,
Telling
and we're
stories.
Well, that, or we're or are we trying to capture moments or memories?
Yeah.
So, is there a connection?
Photographic memories.
Well, or certainly visual representation. So, what is the connection from cave painting to Renaissance, painting to photography to all of these things?
Absolutely. Well, I think it kind of goes back to what Cartier-Bresson says about how we just have these moments and then they disappear. And as people, as humans, we're always trying to reconcile.
No, I remember that moment, and I want to, I want to remember it. Maybe I want to,
you
share it.
You want to remember it. You want to capture it. You want to be able to go back to it and enjoy it. There's so many different reasons why we capture moments and take pictures or draw or whatever. And I do think it's an innate human need and desire, definitely. And maybe it's just gone a little bit off the rails these days.
Well, yeah. I
with
mean,
this,
look, that move fast and break things, concept. What are we breaking? And we're going to take something that kind of works and we're going to improve it, but we're going to move so fast and change it and break it up that we don't always even understand.
In regards to AI, that's particularly concerning.
Absolutely.
To speak to, your thing about AI. I think also
The speed of modern life, though. I mean, things were allowed to evolve perhaps in a different age, and now it's almost
it's
that we don't know what we're losing and what we're changing.
Control. Yeah. And I think, speak to AI and documentary, I don't love the idea of archival AI recreations being put into documentaries. I think what's so wonderful about real archival footage is that you can imagine like, oh, wow, like that person was really there and this really happened. And I get that it'll make things a lot easier for like archival researchers and budgets and all of that. But I think there's so many levels in which AI can maybe detract from true creativity in a way.
Oh, God, yeah.
You can detract from truth.
From truth, exactly. Well, yes. And so, you're supposed to put it somewhere, like, I used AI in this film. But even with that, there's something a little soulless. I don't know. In 5 years, there'll be robots sitting where we're sitting, talking to each other.
Yes, right. The purity of a photograph and or the artist taking it and or the years and years and years, the decades of training and living
and trial
to be
and
able
error,
to pull.
It's the intentionality.
At that moment.
Like to kind of go off what you're saying. It's the intentionality and the thought behind, I want to take this specific frame because of a thought process or an instinct. And I think, when you just lose that and take a million pictures of whatever all the time, what's the intentionality behind it? And therefore, how could it's not really art if there isn't that intention, or I think it loses a little value.
As I'm thinking back on the film, and perhaps as I was watching, my own tendency in my life to get rid of things.
It's a good tendency, I think.
Well, except, if your mom had done that, or
well, that's true.
Or, where we.
Good point.
But I mean,
a very short movie, right?
I lost my dad in January, and I've got boxes and boxes of photographs that I don't know that anyone could really even understand who they are in the pictures. Are they of my dad? Are they of are they of his parents or his grandparents and things like that? And is it just something that that we carry through our lives, or is it a potential way of communicating with the past? And
it could be any of those.
I mean,
things.
For you, it ended up being that, right?
Yeah, that's been one of the most gratifying things about showing it and being with audiences in person. I get so many stories from people every single time. One of the things is like, oh, I've had this box of stuff that I just haven't had the courage or whatever it is, the time to look into, and now I'm inspired to go into it. Now I'm inspired to interview this person who's in their 80s or 90s in my family, or now I'm inspired to pick up my camera again. And so I think showing an example of going to the extreme. But
it doesn't have to take 10 years.
It doesn't have to take 10 years. It doesn't have to take over your entire life. And it doesn't have to cost $1 million. But I think
you can fiend that thing, and it will unlock a key.
Yeah.
Maybe with a couple and open a door, and then that opens another door, and then you really do have you do get connected to the past.
Yeah, and I used to think archival materials were just static materials in boxes. That's it. They're interesting, they're historical. But making this film made me realize that they become alive. If you let your imagination interact with them and you get these stories, they become alive. And I think that's really powerful. And I feel like I tried to kind of bring my mother's story to life through those materials. I just think that's really cool. So I have a whole new respect and sort of love of
archival.
Yeah. I mean, we call it archival, but it's really so much more than that, So these boxes of photographs of your dad, it's like those all hold stories and moments and when they were alive and people were thinking certain things or they were at a certain point in their lives and definitely should go into an album or be scanned or something.
When does something become so, when it's just passed on one generation to the next, and then it does just become an obligation to the next generation because now I can't get rid of this because my parents didn't get rid of it.
I would say there's certain people and families that really, they love that history. They really interact with it. There's certain people that don't care and don't have the time for it, but there are people in your family, probably there's at least one person maybe who will get so much out of that.
Right.
And so even if there's one person as you pass it down who gets that and who can kind of follow the
becomes
trail,
the carrier of that history.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen that in my family. There's like one guy who did the whole family tree research like hundreds of years back.
Right.
Yeah.
And like there's other people who couldn't care less. Do you know what I mean? But to me, I'm the kind of person who loves the research of about 300 years back, you know?
Yeah.
There's a lot here. And that's, no, I mean, there really is. And to say that it's a film about photography, to say that it's just a film about this pioneering artist who you know, are trying to bring back to life, you know, limits the scope of, I think, the people who would think, oh, that's not for me. And I think, you know, we are all human. We all struggle with this desire to connect, to remember and connect with the past. And the film really does deliver that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for talking about this. And I'm excited about the fact that it's going to be rolling out in all these cities in moments. So that's a wonderful thing.
Do you have a website for the film particularly, or is it on just zeitgeistfilms.com?
Zeitgeistfilms.com has our list of upcoming screenings. My Instagram is probably the most active as far as me posting as daily as things are happening, and that's it's SOIGNESONG, or you can look up Rachel Elizabeth Seed and you'll find it. Yeah, very excited to come to the Laemmle again in a few days. Thank you so much for supporting independent, artsy, weird films like mine.
Well, as you can see, it's what inspires me. So
yeah, no, I mean, it's honestly just so grateful that art house cinemas exist and that, you know, people can congregate and enjoy and talk about all these kind of non-huge blockbuster films.
There we go.
That also have immense value. So
Indeed, they do.
Indeed.
The film is A Photographic Memory. It's directed by Rachel Seed. It's going to be out in theaters. Check it out. Look for it. It's worth the watch.
And if you like today's show, please like it, subscribe to the show, and share it with friends so you can let them know, too, about this wonderful film, Photographic Memory.
thank you both so much for having me.
Thank you, Rachel.
Our show was produced by Raphael Sparge with on-site producer Norrin Dickerson. Supervising producers are Thomas Cassetta and Miles McCreary. Our show was edited by Gabriel Laemmle and sound mixed by Thomas Cassetta. Our musical theme was composed by Isabel Engman and Gerardo Garcia Jr. Marketing by Gabriel Laemmle. Show graphics by Jenna DeAngelis. Additional marketing and web design by Stephanie Peters. Filmed at the historic Laemmle Royal Theater in Los Angeles, California. See you next time on Inside the Art House. If you like today's show, please consider subscribing to our channel to learn more on Inside the Art House.